This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Upgrade your business with Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning fewer carts going abandoned and more sales going cha-ching. So if you're into growing your business, get a commerce platform that's ready to sell wherever your customers are. Visit shopify.com to upgrade your selling today.
What I wasn't mentally prepared for was just how difficult it was going to be to even get interviews in some cases. Yes, I was loud. Yes, I was proud. Yes, I fought hard for the things I believed in. I'm not sorry for that. But obviously, maybe for some, I was too loud.
Welcome to Quiet Riot, the politics podcast that is more open borders than get off my land. I'm Naomi Smith.
And I'm Andreou, the migrant labourer being exploited for your entertainment.
In these turbulent times, we're here to help you check the dials, readjust your course, and navigate you through the big issues of the day.
So switch on autopilot, grab a drink from the trolley, and recline your seat for another Quiet Riot. Hello and welcome to Quiet Riot. I'm Alex.
And I'm Naomi. On today's show, we're going to be talking about immigration levels, the latest data from the ONS, as well as doing a stock take on Brexit on its 5-year anniversary. And oh my God, Alex, it feels so much longer than 5 years.
And in other weird ways, it feels shorter. One of the many ways in which this podcast is different is that we put none of our content behind a paywall or hold back its release. Everything is free to everyone at the same time. At a time when angry clickbait based on questionable claims is ubiquitous, we think that calm debate based on fact should not come with strings attached. If you agree with us on this and can afford to, head over to ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod now and sign up as a backer from as little as £5.
And while our content will always be free, we recognise your support for the commitment it shows and co-create the show with you. Alex, Kenny and I know we don't have a monopoly on good ideas. Our ko-fi.com backers get access to our Discord channel where we discuss content, and you get invites to regular editorial meetings. And we are already taking forward 4 regular features that you suggested at last week's editorial meeting, as well as many topic and guest suggestions.
To wit, by popular demand, we are delighted to be joined this week by immigration policy expert and campaigner extraordinaire, Zoe Gardner. Hello, Zoe.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be on the pod.
Oh, Zoe, one of your most enduringly viral videos, of which you have many, involves schooling a former MP, Jonathan Gullis, lest we forget, on the asylum system. And he's been in the news quite a bit recently, get the small violins out, because he's finding it quite difficult to find a job since the good voters of Stoke booted him out. What amount of sympathy do you have for him?
Oh, wow. You're going to make me sound really callous right off the bat. But,
No, just be honest.
Yeah, no, really. I wish nothing but the worst for that man. Listen, if he can't get a job, what was he? He was a teacher before, and he denigrated teachers and spoke badly about them for striking when their pay was disgracefully low, and their conditions are teachers work so hard. And then after that, after being part of the Tory government that has decimated our public services and run this austerity agenda for 14 years, he's then going back and looking for a job in that sector. No wonder no one wants to hear from him. Obviously not. Plus, if I can school him, then clearly he shouldn't be teaching anyone.
I find this very puzzling because we keep being told that everyone agrees with them quietly, that they are the vast majority, yes. And yet not a single HR person or someone on his side to say, yeah, I like that, Jonathan.
Not even GB News.
Quiet Riot.
It's 2025 and Britain is marking its Independence Day celebration. As the fireworks stream through the sky, we wonder why it took us so long to leave. The years that followed the 2016 referendum didn't just reinvigorate our economy, our democracy, and our liberty, they improved relations with our neighbours. Terms were agreed easily enough. Britain withdrew from the EU's political structures and institutions, but kept its tariff-free arrangements in place. Outside it, we again lead the world. Our fuel bills have tumbled, boosting productivity, increasing incomes and stimulating the entire economy. New industries have sprung up around the country. Older industries, too, have revived. Opting out of the EU's data protection rules has turned Hoxton into the software capital of the world. During the first 12 months after the vote, Britain confirmed trade deals with India, China and Australia. Our universities are flourishing, taking the world's brightest students. A points-based immigration system invites the world's top talent, and the sense of having had to win a place means that new settlers arrive with pride and patriotism. Unsurprisingly, several other European countries have followed us out of the EU. Denmark, Ireland, the Netherlands. The United Kingdom now leads a 22-state bloc that forms a free trade area with the EU. Perhaps the greatest benefit, though, is not easy to quantify. Britain has recovered its self-belief. As we left the EU, we straightened our backs, looked about us, and realized that we were still a nation to be reckoned with. We knew that our song had not yet been sung. That was Dan Hannan's vision of Brexit by 2025, published on the eve of the referendum. Some of us knew back then this was a dangerous delusion. Stop talking the country down, we were told. Naomi, where to begin?
Daniel.
Is Hoxton not the world's software capital then?
It is not.
It is not.
It is not. But what have we
It's
seen?
a really good schnitzel place, though.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, and that's pretty European sounding as a food.
It's a result of sorts.
What have we seen? I'm going to chunk it up into two things. First, the sheer economic hit, because from that, so much else would have been able to flow. Because Brexit means less money for everything, from foreign aid to institutions that advance British soft power to our own public services at home. We took back control, to borrow their phrase, and nobody has felt it. Like precisely nobody apart from a hedge fund owner feels more empowered than they did in 2016.
No, I mean, if anything, I would say the last decade feels like it's been out of control. Like everything has been out of control.
And the big numbers that lost us the referendum because we talked too much about scary figures and threats of emergency budgets, and none of that really cut through in the way that a simpler number, 350 million on the side of a bus, did. But if we look at the big numbers now, OBR, 4% hit to UK productivity. The Centre for European Reform, 40 billion hit to government budget compared to the counterfactual of having stayed in the single market. Goldman Sachs, a 5% loss in economic growth versus other comparable countries. Bloomberg, 100 billion a year in lost output. And then there are all of the consumer stats that we know about, the price of the weekly shop that has gone up on average, the fact that on average we're at least £2,000 per person worse off. Nobody feels that they have more control over their lives except for the most powerful rich people in the country, who were always going to be able to box around any cost that came their way. The numbers alone mean that the opportunity cost and those lost years, even if we do manage to start to grow again, even if we do sign a better trading relationship than the one we've got, we're never getting that back. That's gone. It would be almost impossible to catch up on all of that. And the knock-on effect is detrimental on all of our public services, our businesses, particularly our small ones that employ the majority of people that work in the UK, etc. There's also the much less tangible and politically toxic hit that we've taken. And when I think back to late 2015, Cameron calls the referendum, And I just had this surge in me. It just almost awoke from nowhere that I had to jack in my job and campaign to try and stay in. I was incredibly worried that we would leave. I thought 40 years of the Murdoch press pouring bile down everyone's throats about the EU will be incredibly difficult to overcome in a short 6-month campaign. But why? What was it about that moment that really drove me? Yes, I'm an enormously pro-European individual. I've got internationalist values. I believe when we work with the world, everything is better. I love freedom of movement and all that comes with that. But I think what was one of the main drivers of it was that what it would unleash if the Leavers won. Because for me, the arguments for Brexit were masking something much more sinister and deeper in the ideology of those that were advocating for it. And so we have seen also the rise of right-wing populism in the country. We have seen a legitimising of othering, of using awful words to describe people that have arrived in this country to help us, to work in social care, to work in our NHS, to work in our schools. And we've also turned our backs on the world. We had governments that threatened to break international treaties they themselves had just signed. We put at risk the Good Friday Agreement that ended decades of bloodshed in the UK. We played hokey cokey with our membership of the Horizon scheme. We snatched away the opportunities offered by Erasmus Plus for young people across the country. And of course, we have seen thousands of EU nationals leave the NHS, leave hospitality, leave social care, leave the agricultural sector. And we're poorer for it. And we've undermined our ability as a nation to lead other social democracies and liberal democracies around the world with who we're allied on important issues of the day. Our reputational damage was very, very significant. And so you've got the financial hit, but you've also got the stuff that is hard to quantify, but my God is important and that we feel. And we now find ourselves in an era where, yes, we do have a Labour government, but we have a right-wing media constantly platforming those who seek to undermine anything that that government is doing by whichever means, very little constraint on their airtime. And they seem to get to set the debate, whether in Parliament or on the airwaves. And that really, really worries me.
Zoe?
Yeah, well, I'm depressed now. No, seriously. I mean, obviously, everything you said is right. And I also agree that as time goes by with this, and it does make me feel absolutely bloody ancient that it's been that long, especially since the campaign started. It's going to be like 9 years. 10 years.
There are
coming up.
MPs that were too young to vote in it that are now in Parliament.
Yeah. So that in and of itself fills me with existential dread. But no, for the country, I think we're more and more able to take the long view on it. And I do totally agree that we were accused of hysteria when we talked about how this was a far-right, anti-migrant, racist agenda that was pushing Brexit. But if you look at who has been empowered since in our politics, Brexit isn't the only factor there, but like that is where we have come to. And I think where we're headed is towards a real threat to our membership on the European Convention on Human Rights as well. It's remarkable how similar the framing of it is. Sometimes it was implied and sometimes it was directly said that leaving the EU would get rid of all them foreigners, or get rid of and not just get rid of EU migrants who were demonized and dehumanized, but also specifically told that we would get rid of asylum seekers, that we would get rid of brown people, that we would get rid of Muslims. And shocker.
And if you stay, you're going to get a lot more Muslims because Turkey's going to join the EU soon, and then they'll all flood in.
I remember that leaflet.
And obviously, and for reasons that I think, we're going to get into, that very much isn't what happened and was never going to be what happened. And the same is true of the increasing sort of drumbeat of saying, oh, well, actually, what we have to do is leave the European Convention on Human Rights.
It's never enough.
No, it will never be enough.
They cannot be satiated.
It is always going to be another thing, another right that we as an entire country, that we as citizens can give up to pursue this agenda of wiping out the diversity of our country, the fact that we are a multi-ethnic country, a country that has always and will always be a country of immigration. And those things have been so denigrated, although they are so much of what makes our country good. There will always be another set of rights that they can campaign to make us give up.
There was some indication right after the referendum that showed a much improved attitude to immigration. Like there was a social attitude survey and a series of polls just after that showed like a sharp
Decline.
improvement in people's perception of immigration. And it's almost as if people felt they had taken control.
Yep.
So now it was okay. And now it's sort of worse than ever.
My feeling about the sort of improvement in attitudes towards immigration directly following the referendum was that it was less about people being satisfied that they had taken control and therefore being okay with immigration, and more about a backlash to the backlash. A response, a counter backlash. That would be a better way.
So what you mean is people saying, I love immigration, me, because that label had been attached to them for supporting Brexit throughout the referendum. So next chance that came along to express an opinion, they were like, I love immigrants. That was nothing to do with it, which was quite a prevalent attitude in the Brexit camp.
I think that there was some of that. There was some of people who had previously been sort of maybe like not really interested one way or the other, being like, oh no, I'm not associated with them Brexiters. I don't agree with it. I think this is stupid. You know, there were quite a lot of factors, but there was also just the fact that it wasn't just one bump directly after the referendum. Opinions continued to become more positive for several years. Actually, they've only just started falling back down very significantly over the last sort of like 2 years. And I think that the impact actually of the pandemic and the narratives that we had around the contribution that migrants were making to our health service was like extremely important in improving attitudes as well. So I think there was a lot going on there, and attitudes they also really depend on how you ask the question.
Yeah.
They do.
It's the issue of small boat crossings, I think, has pushed
that has
it.
absolutely the small boat crossings, and of course how that has been presented as an invasion.
Recently, the new Tory leader, Kemi Badenoch, admitted that mistakes were made on Brexit.
Seems to be the main thing she does.
I love that expression. It's like someone came in,
Don't know who.
not who, and made some mistakes. Let's have a listen.
We were making announcements without proper plans. We announced that we would leave the European Union before we had a plan for growth outside the EU. Those mistakes were made because we told people what they wanted to hear first and then tried to work it out later.
To what extent do things like this make it easier to discuss broader options for repairing our relationship when someone pipes up and says, yeah, okay, it wasn't the best?
Well, look, she's not wrong. She's not wrong.
Yeah.
And we've often talked about this before. Leave won because it didn't define what leave looked like. The various different parts of the campaign, whether they were the Daniel Hannan saying, we'll probably still stay in the single market, don't worry about it, you'll still be able to freely cross borders and trade and things like that, or whether you were on the extreme other end of that saying, we're going to go WTO rules, there will be no deal whatsoever, no deal is better than a bad deal. Voters did not know what Brexit was going to look like because very, very purposefully it was not defined. And actually talking about how you frame questions, as Zoe has just done, is so critical in all of this. And we've always known that when you ask people about immigration, not so keen. And then when you get specific, well, what about nurses? What about doctors? What about social care people? Love them, love them, love them, love them. Yeah, they can come. International students, love them, no problem. It was the same with leave. Do you want to take back control? Yes, I do. Oh, will you want to if it means that you can no longer do this, if it's going to put the price of goods up, if it's going to mean we sign trade deals with other countries around the world that could let substandard products into our food supply chain? Of course, no, no, no. So that's how they won. But she's not wrong to make the point. And I get a sense within the Conservative Party that they are pretty split at the moment about whether to double down and go hard on the reform agenda or whether to try and reposition themselves as slightly more moderate and centrist on some of this stuff. And I think there is a pretty big war waging within them at the moment. And there was a poll out this week showing that broadly more Conservative supporters wanted them to merge with Reform UK than Reform UK members wanted the merger with the Conservatives. So there's a lot of tension going on there.
We saw that a little bit from Luke Trill's polling
yes, that's right.
Like the people who had gone Conservative to Reform were the least likely defector to come back to the Conservatives.
Yeah.
Like you could get Labour people to vote for the Conservatives more easily than you could get former Conservatives that are now Reform.
And listeners will know that I didn't do Sunday school last week, so I was very, very busy getting the front page of The Observer with our Best for Britain polling. It was about trade prioritisation and should the government prioritise trade with the EU or America or elsewhere. But we oversampled the people that switched from Conservatives to Labour last July because that is the battleground group. The Tories need to try and win them back and Labour need to try and hold on to them. So what we found is that the people who switched from Con to Lab last year are on average more pro-European on several issues than the average voter in the UK. So there is a huge amount of food for thought in all of that. But at the end of the day, it doesn't fucking matter because Labour have got an enormous majority. They are the ones that are going to go in and negotiate with the EU starting very, very soon in terms of what that reset looks like. And they can just do it and crack on and do it. And they need to crack on and do it because they need the growth that it will bring.
Yeah, I don't think that's entirely fair. I think the amount of political space that they feel they have does matter.
I think it is a lot bigger than they think it is.
I agree.
And I'm going to help them prove it.
I agree completely. It is a lot bigger than they think it is. But I also, as you know, long held view that they are rightly cautious because there was so enmeshed in the Brexit argument was this idea that the EU is something that's being imposed from high up, that they feel they need to be following public sentiment rather than leading it. And I think that is right. They need to have people demanding that they get closer to the EU than they're making out they're willing to. I think that is politically astute, actually.
Where I will say there is potentially a danger zone and the work hasn't yet been done on it. If you remember at the last general election, turnout was low. And why was it low? Because Tories stayed home. They didn't vote. A huge chunk of them didn't. And I was asking John Curtis, who's also appeared on this show, about it last night and asking him, do we know why they didn't vote and whether they are more likely to stay at home next time than not, or whether they could be persuaded back, and in which direction do we feel they're going to go? That will take a lot of qualitative analysis, not just quant, to find out. But there is a risk, certainly, that maybe they are leaning in a different direction and will be harder to persuade on the European stuff. So I'm sure that the electoral strategists within the Labour Party will be considering not just the people that have switched from Con to them, but who are pro-European, but all the people who might come back out next time round if they get pissed off enough.
Quiet Riot.
Now, this is a paid advertisement for BetterHelp Therapy Online, who are sponsoring today's episode. Big thank you to them, and here's a little more about their service. 2025 has already thrown some huge stories at us, and you might wish that life came with some instructions on how to write your story for the year ahead. Something you could refer to when you're a bit stuck or unable to get a handle on things. If you lose power, you call an electrician. You don't stumble around endlessly in the dark. Well, therapists are trained to help you find your way around your inner environment and teach you the skills to cope. As the world's biggest online therapy service, BetterHelp, that's H-E-L-P, has matched millions of people with professionally licensed and vetted therapists, all 100% online. You just fill out a simple questionnaire and they'll find the right person for you quickly and at an affordable price. You can change your therapist anytime if it's not clicking. And you can arrange to discuss things on video, call, or even text chat at a time that suits you. That means no waiting or searching for the right help. You can talk to someone quickly and easily. With over 5,000 therapists in the UK already, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a wide variety of expertise in mental health. Write your story with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/quietriot. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/quietriot. So I know you think that the media landscape has played a really big part in this. And you're kind of part of it, the media landscape, I think.
I wish
Never
I was
off our screen.
You sort of try your best.
Exactly. I do what I can to be, but unfortunately, the platform for my kind of content about real humane solutions to managing migration well, that's not the big news.
How do you think this has happened? I mean, in terms of when you look at broad values-based questions, the country is not represented by those organizations. So how have they come to dictate so much of our politics while representing such a sliver of the population?
It's a really key question. What I come back down to again and again is the resource, the money. The owners of the media are like literally a handful of fabulously rich men. All men. And we've seen this in report after report. You know, the shareholders and bosses of energy and utility and water companies have increased their wealth. The owners of the media have increased their wealth. The billionaire class has increased its wealth, while the rest of the country, including even the middle class and the people who, relatively speaking, used to be quite affluent, have all seen a massive squeeze on, you know, quality of life, purchasing power and so on in the UK in the last decade or so. And there has to be a scapegoat. There has to be a scapegoat, and there are people with huge amounts of resource who don't want to be seen to be the problem, don't want, you know, who is the cause of your problems? It's the people with the power and the wealth, but they are putting a massive amount of resource. They have created GB News, which is big and influential, and the owner of the majority shareholder of GB News now owns The Spectator, is like first in line in the bidding to own The Telegraph. Like this is a media empire that they're building, and they are willing to put a lot of money. And on the other side of the debate, if you look at just on migration, the resource going into the anti-migrant messaging versus who is on the other side, it's a bunch of small charities whose primary task is to support people who are in extremely vulnerable and difficult circumstances in their lives and who maybe have one comms person. And that is the whole other side of the migration equation. That's why I'm the person you might have heard of who talks about migration, because there bloody well isn't anybody who has any resource to put into this. And on the other side, we have the entire Reform Party, the entirety of GB News, the Times, the Telegraph, the Sun, the Mail. It's just a huge amount of money. It's a huge amount of money, and there's no one funding our side.
Naomi.
Yes.
We've heard a lot about PEM this week, the Pan-Euro-Mediterranean Convention. Yeah. What is it? Is it a positive step forward to be discussing that? Yeah, maybe.
Okay. All right. Big question. What is PEM? I'll start with.
Yeah.
So it launched more than a decade ago now, I think 2012. And it expands the definition of what a domestic product is across Europe. So it makes it easier for countries in and around Europe to trade by making goods produced in a PEM member state as labelled made in France, for example, when more of its parts might be sourced from other PEM countries. So Ukraine is in PEM, Morocco, Syria, etc.
Right.
But at Best Written, we think it's potentially a little bit of a red herring, which is why you won't have seen us bigging it up, because it just wouldn't significantly nudge the dial on anything that really needs to be unshackled. And I'm talking about business and British business that tries to trade with the EU and Northern Ireland. The share of ingredients in UK-made products sourced in PEM countries is anywhere from about 1% to 2.8%.
Yeah.
And that's according to the Centre for Inclusive Trade Policy. So I think what we can do is say that PEM is the right direction, but it is by no means a game changer. And the game changer comes in the form of full beneficial alignment in goods and services accompanied by a reciprocal youth mobility scheme.
Agreed.
And that is what, but is it good that we're talking about it? Yes. I think the risk is we could end up being in the holding pen of PEM indefinitely and not getting the stuff that we do need.
We're talking about PEM in its current iteration, but that is also a concept that can develop. Could PEM act as a sort of backdoor to a customs union?
Look, anything is possible. I think we've got to recognise that the EU has very few shits to give about the UK right now. particularly when you look at the domestic issues facing France, Germany, and others. We've caused them an enormous amount of pain over the last decade because of Brexit. And we have a rare opportunity for a limited conversation about what we need. And we just need to prioritise that. Now, look, whether we end up in a customs arrangement rather than the customs union, whatever, may or may not happen, could potentially take quite a long time. What can happen quickly within the next year is a negotiation around full beneficial alignment. Nothing else is possible in the short term that could
everything
have
else
an
is
impact.
a waste of time and effort.
A distraction.
Basically.
A distraction.
Yeah. For me as a foreigner, just looking into the country, I mean, I've been here a long time, but there's always a sort of level of detachment. There is a little bit of distance, and maybe with that comes a tiny bit more clarity. It feels like Brexit triggered an identity crisis.
Today, too many people in positions of power behave as though they have more in common with international elites than with the people down the road, the people they employ, the people they pass on the street. But if you believe you're a citizen of the world, you're a citizen of nowhere. You don't understand what the very word citizenship means.
Suddenly Britain, actually not Britain, England, to be fair, it wasn't a British problem, it's an English problem. They had to find something around which they could cohere. You know, they had to redefine their identity because I think for decades, especially through the right-wing press, being against the faceless Brussels bureaucrats and the rules coming from the EU had acted as a proxy. It can gather you psychologically to be against stuff. And the moment that was removed, it felt like the English identity kind of fell apart. Scottish people have their own thing. Welsh people have their own thing. Northern Irish people have their own thing.
They've got more than one thing.
But I think the English, because they've imposed so much of their identity on what it is to be British, have spread themselves quite thin on this cracker.
Yeah.
There are very few things that you can claim to be English specifically rather than British, right? And all the things that you can claim to be English specifically are things that the right wing shits on. It's extraordinary. You know, the music of this country, the language of this country, the literature, the film, all the cultural aspects that you could center an English identity into, they are things they don't like. And that leaves, that leaves this nation, I think, in a really difficult position. And that's the work that needs to be done, ultimately. People who are secure about their identity, they don't worry about foreigners. They don't worry about Muslims. They do, all of that is...
Mandatory Morris dancing in all schools. That's what Alex wants.
But you know what I mean, right? It's an expression of insecurity,
Of
this
course.
anger, this hatred.
But othering always is. And I think it's completely linked to everything Zoe was saying about the lack of wealth redistribution in this country, feeling like you're completely out of control, that you don't even, know who you are anymore because you can't get a house, you can't get a job, you can't get a doctor's appointment.
So it must be down to someone.
So it's got to be somebody's fault. And then also I think that, there is a constitutional question here that was answered by posing a referendum question on Europe. I think people were feeling so disenfranchised and disempowered. And we don't have regional government in this country in the way we should do for a country of our size. The white paper that Angela Rayner has published on the strategic authorities that are being created, that feels like treating the constitutional agenda as a business matter, an efficiency-saving thing, rather than a citizenship matter. And I think that sense of citizenship, which you have described really beautifully, is in danger of being lost even more.
Call to action. You're getting this one.
Thank you. It's just a general one, really. Best for Britain does a lot of work behind the scenes, quietly. We are on the cusp of producing some work that we can tell everybody about that I think will really, really change the game on the reset of the relationship between the EU and the UK. And the big billionaires buying up the Telegraph and the Spectator and GB News, they are funding their adjacent think tanks like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah. Why
and it is
UK
not only
changing Europe? I mean,
exactly why the wonderful organisations doing migrant work are charities that struggle to fundraise. So do civil society campaigns like ours on the other side. So I'm not asking you for money. I'm asking you to go to bestforwritten.org/join. That is totally free to do. What it really means is that you'll be the first people to know when we've got an action for you to take, and it will honestly, genuinely be stuff that will make a difference, that will make your MP sit up and listen, will make your local paper editor take notice of what we're up to. So please do that, and do it in the next few days so that all of this great work that I can't tell you about yet, but I will do, can be in your inbox before anyone else gets to hear about it.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
And once again, it's time for everyone's favourite bit of banjo music. It's time for Wokey Dokey.
Wokey Dokey. Wokey Dokey.
Alex, hit me. What's woke now?
The Conservative group in the London Assembly are really doing quite sterling work. This is the second Wokey Dokey they get in a few weeks. And they knocked off Michael Gove off the top spot, telling Nick Ferrari that replacing Ofsted ratings from a single word to a few sentences was wokery. Yeah. So the honour this time goes to Alexandru Georgiou in the debate about the budget. Let's have a listen.
So pedestrian crossings, that's effectively what Assembly member, the Green Group are looking for, is a blank cheque for local authorities on pedestrianisation schemes. All these woke and broke councils in London have got no clue what they're doing when it comes to our transport network. And I'm going to rehash something, seeing as our mayor loves to hark back to the mayoral election. The war on the motorist. The war on the motorist. The woke liberals in this place are determined to wage war on the motorist.
So there you have it. Pedestrian crossings are woke now.
Oh, you were just talking about how the right hate culture and the Beatles and their fame. We'd never have had that album, would we? But Alessandro Giorgio, now, look, you're the expert in the room, Alex, but that sounds pretty Greek to me.
I knew you were going to ask, so I had to look it up. He's actually of Greek Cypriot heritage, but eschews that label, as he told X only last month.
Oh my God, what?
It's being Greek woke.
I remember an ex-head of a school in the borough being introduced to me by a resident. She was of Greek Cypriot descent, like me. She said, "You're a Tory?" My father would be turning in his grave knowing a Greek boy was a Tory. My response, "I'm British."
Actually, one of the most Tories I ever knew was of Greek Cypriot origin.
I'm not surprised. It's a very conservative country. I don't know why this woman thought it's unusual.
I mean, look, she had a similarly very Greek-sounding name, and you were not allowed to. I used to say, "Oh, I love Cyprus." I go, I didn't want to talk about it.
Oh,
no,
yeah.
I've never been. I don't ever want to go. I am from Bromley.
Yeah. The funniest ones are sort of second-generation Greek Australians.
Oh gosh, they're mental.
Because they preserved 50s Greece in aspic when they went over there, right?
Okay, yeah.
You have to be a virgin when you get married, like all of that shit. And then they come to Greece sort of 60 years later, they're like,
louche behaviour.
It is the biggest culture shock of their entire lives.
So funny. That is really common actually in diaspora communities, both in like the language is preserved and is like often an older version of the language.
So it would be like us going, "Thou hath
hair,
my fine maiden," instead of saying, "Hey Zoe, you look great."
Exactly. And then they also, a lot of the values and traditions also like end up stuck in like this. It's very interesting.
Well, thanks, Alex, and listeners. We love hearing about.
Thou art welcome.
And listeners, thou shalt be gratefully rewarded if you are to send us in your instances of woke that you find as you go around the internet.
Woketh.
Send them in to quietriotpod@gmail.com. Figures released this week by the Office of National Statistics show that within 4 years, the number of deaths in the UK is projected to overtake births, meaning net migration will be the only source of population growth, largely driven by the large cohort of post-World War II babies reaching end of life and combined with falling fertility rates. All of which means that if Farage and his ilk get their way and close our borders for little to no immigration, the UK population would actually shrink. And so too, of course, would any hope of economic growth, in turn having hugely negative effects on our national debt repayments, ability to fund public services, not to mention a marked decline in our ability to care for our increasingly aged population. But most headlines writing up that data chose to run instead with UK population explosion to 72.5 million.
So fucking weird, isn't it? It's like it literally said the opposite.
Zoe, anytime these kinds of figures get released, you get busy. So give us your kind of overview, TLDR read on this latest data dump.
The one-line answer is thank God for immigration, because I think that we know that the insane anti-migrant right, their strongest suit is projection, right? So everything that they say about something else is actually
their baggage.
It reflects back on them. And I think the most important one that has been allowed to take root is this idea that immigration creates a strain on public services. What creates a strain on public services is the fact that more and more and more of us are old. As the population rises by 7.3% over the next couple of decades, the pensioner population is going to rise at twice that rate.
Wow.
Yeah. The population of over 85s is absolutely soaring during that time. And those people obviously have health and social care needs. And they are the reason why there is greater and greater strain on our NHS and our social care services. And at the current time right now, Age UK estimates that 2 million pensioners are unable to receive the care that they need for basic tasks like getting up out of bed, getting dressed, getting clean.
I've been through it with my own family. It's awful. Zoe, that's helpful as an overview. On Quiet Riot, we are all about trying to kind of see each other's point of view, find ways to talk with those with whom we disagree in a calm way. And you're brilliant at it. Like, I have to say, anytime you're on the media, even with the biggest arsehole being frothing at the mouth, nativist, xenophobic, occasionally even racist, your composure is incredible. What do you find ever really convinces them, or are they completely unconvincible, but there are ways that you can, like what are the arguments that you know you've got up your sleeve that you've probably won the argument in the eyes of viewers?
Well, I think taking pensioners is a good example here, because I wouldn't want any of your listeners to think that what I just said about the strain on our NHS and so on being caused by pensioners is me trying to scapegoat them, blame them, you know, that they don't deserve that support and that care. I think actually there's a very broad base of support for taking care of our elderly population in this country. It crosses generations, it crosses political divides and so on. So when you're talking with an absolute lunatic in the media, it is quite different to when you're maybe talking to somebody around the dinner table with your family or at workplaces. But they have to give you certain amounts of time to come back, and they have to at least try to appear a base level of reasonable most of the time. And so you can get away with a lot. I find one of the things is never to fall into the trap of becoming a sort of emotional, hysterical, over the top, right? Even though what they're saying is horrific at that level, if you step back out of your brain a bit, and I do this a lot, and I just sort of laugh at them, and I just say, well, that doesn't work because of this. So like, if you're so concerned about the winter fuel payment for pensioners, don't you realize that with an aging population, we won't be able to pay pensions without immigration? That's just a simple fact, and it's verifiable, and you can give the stats on it. And you just say that with a smile on your face and say, why don't you care about our pensioners? And you turn things around a little bit. I just try to infuse a bit of lightness into it because these things are so serious and they are so existential and they are ruining our bloody country. That is what these people are doing. There's more power in not showing that it gets to you and in just acting like they do, which is that this is all a game of trying to win an argument. And that's what they do because they don't care and we care. And I think that makes us more vulnerable. So sometimes just turning it around on them, laughing at them, pointing out the fallacies and the logical inconsistencies in their own arguments and how it's harming the people that they will think of themselves as sticking up for.
And being simple. I mean, that is what they do very effectively.
Yeah.
And,
and just talk about the impacts of things. People say, oh, but shouldn't we be deporting them? And you just ask, well, okay, so what is the impact of deportations and what is the outcome for our communities if we go about it that way versus if we introduce measures to stop our immigration system producing so many people who don't have a documented immigration status? That kind of reform would actually stop us from having an undocumented migrant population by creating like safer long-term routes to settlement for migrants coming into the country. Yep. Now, we're all agreed, aren't we, that the aim is to not have undocumented migrants in the UK. Yeah. You know, if you're constantly chasing the people kicked out at the end, then there will be more people coming down the line. Wouldn't it be more sensible to fix the system? It's hard to argue with that.
You mentioned the D word, deportations, and we can't use that word without talking about Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And this week, the mass deportations that he is claiming to be doing.
And I think it feeds into this debate very well, to be honest. I think there's a very similar thing going on.
Absolutely. And so, Zoe, to what extent is that performative, do you think?
I listened to your podcast last week and brilliant conversation that you had about how there is a massive performative element about this. We're in this time basically because so much of our politics is done via media, that the image and the symbol is everything. And Donald Trump has immediately released imagery of people chained up being taken to a deportation flight on a military plane. Those deportations were happening, a week ago as well, unfortunately, under the Biden administration, but they weren't. But their aims were different, and also, they're not got the same media savvy. They just don't know how to capture the media narrative in the same way, and so it wasn't presented in the same way. So I think that we need to be careful about this deportations narrative. As you say, Alex, it's totally been imported wholesale from the Trumpist playbook to the far right of our politics and our commentariat in the UK now talking much more about deportations. Again, it's really, really important to note that this is just a fanfare. This is just a spectacle. You cannot deport your way out of a diverse British society because the boat there sailed back in the 50s at best. And
came back in the 60s.
Yeah. And secondly, you can't deport your way out of undocumented migration because people become undocumented in this country because of the flaws in the immigration system. So you have to fix the immigration system in order to help people not become undocumented.
I mean, my cynical soul tells me that maybe that's the point.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe the point of this big show going on in the United States at the moment, concentrating on one city very specifically, is to drive a lot of people into the undergrowth of the economy so they can be exploited, basically. Yeah. To what extent do you think has the disintegration of the Conservative Party contributed to the toxicity of the debate? What I mean is rhetoric always heats up around leadership elections, right? Because people take big positions and I can't help but think that the fact that the Tories have had 6 in the last sort of 8 years.
While overseeing record levels of immigration.
Yeah, I mean, that must have fueled, because it becomes a bidding contest. Suella Braverman, she made a speech to the Heritage Foundation yesterday. And if you thought that stuff she's previously said was bad, I mean, she ended by saying, deport everyone, and then taking Martin Luther King Jr.'s words.
Oh, bloody hell.
Let freedom ring.
It's just not freedom for...
Yeah, because her parents were different, apparently. They were part of a different wave of migration who were very grateful and patriotic.
Well, that's really key, isn't it? I was reading a book by Rachel Sharby, who's a fantastic
we know Rachel,
journalist. Yeah, her book.
Actually, we must have Rachel on.
You should.
Rachel, come on the show.
Oh, she's fantastic. Like the brain on that woman. And her book, Off-White, is fantastic. And it's about anti-Semitism.
And she's an Arab Jew.
Yes, she is of Iraqi heritage, I believe. She describes and links to the research and the documentation of the language that was used about the arrival of Jews in the UK throughout our history, and obviously then to the language that was used about the Windrush generation when they came. And but it is word for word the exact same. Every single trope, every single thing they say about Muslims and migrants and asylum seekers today. Everything has been done before about these groups that now those same people would claim to say, oh, no, not them, those ones are fine. What we've seen is the total disintegration of the centre right.
Yeah.
I believe it was Michael Heseltine interviewed on LBC or something a couple of days ago, and he was saying how we need to wake up, this is paving the way into fascism, this outright racist, horrific
And he'd
hate.
remember because he is 92
Exactly.
or 3 or something.
But it's like when I find myself saying, he's calling it right on what's happening, my politics just could not be further from his. But we are in a situation where there is no voice whatsoever of a reasonable right. There is no such thing. It doesn't exist. Don't kid yourself that it doesn't exist. We should not be compromising ever again. I mean, this is what we've done. We have repeatedly said that we can compromise with the people who hate us and who hate foreigners and who hate anybody who's different, and that we can split the difference and find some reasonable middle ground, and we can't. We need a good policy, not a policy that is split halfway with bad policy, because that's what we have now, and what we are forced to consistently defend, and we had to do it with Brexit, and we're going to have to do it with the ECHR. We are constantly forced to defend something that is fundamentally pretty shit. And sorry, I'm getting really worked up because
good. You need to. And look, that was another thing I was going to ask you about, how to handle yourself in conversations with a loved one who, might have some really awful views that they air and choose to air one day, and you didn't know before that actually they're a dreadful Islamophobe or whatever it is. Does logic work with debunking their tropes, or do you occasionally have to stoop to fight back, or is that something you save for a safe audience to rile them up to go out and actually, push for change?
I try not to get that worked up unless I feel like I'm talking among friends. I think that...
And you are.
I think that when you're talking to family members, colleagues, stuff like that, it can be really, really difficult. I find, especially family members, if they say something awful, it can be really, really hurtful. And you can feel like a failure, because you can feel like, well, if I can't convince this person who's close to me, how on earth can,
Yeah.
And I think that people need to give themselves a break. I think that the really important thing to remember that one thing almost never happens, and that is that you have a conversation with somebody who disagrees with you, and within that conversation they go, yes, Trump is a fascist.
Yeah.
Immigration is fine. That never happens.
That's just not real life.
It's just not what really happens. So what matters, as far as you can, and there are limits to this, but to keep the conversation going. You have a conversation, you come back to it later, you keep it light, you say, if we disagree on this, that doesn't mean we're on opposite sides of some fundamental divide. Yeah. People feel like they're either in the woke or the unwoke camp now, and you say one thing that's wrong and you
get labelled.
You get labelled and you're now irredeemable. And I think we need to make it really clear that we don't feel that way about the people around us, and that we are willing to have conversations where we challenge each other and we don't agree, and then we can stop and we can leave it. We can both go away and think about it, and we will come back and we will talk again. And
I think that's really important, allowing conversations to percolate without pushing them too far. My mama used to say, angry people don't listen, but that doesn't mean they haven't heard.
Yeah.
And the other thing, I interviewed someone who is doing that work with radicalized youths, and they said that the best way to approach people who seem to be leaning in that direction is to just ask loads of open-ended questions. Without judgment, just go, why do you like Andrew Tate?
Moving us back on to why immigration is necessary and good. Of course, it is good for so many socially enriching, wonderful things that makes our culture better, our food better, our language skills better and evolve and all of that delicious stuff. But on the economy, UK national debt. It's all we ever hear about from the media. She's going to breach her fiscal rules. How are we ever going to repay it? Tell me about how it links to population growth.
That bit of the ONS report never makes it into the news for some reason. They tend to produce, and the OBR before the budget will upgrade those estimates.
Yeah.
So they tend to produce estimates of growth, of debt versus GDP, of all those indicators on a medium immigration, low immigration, and high immigration model.
Yeah.
And there are 3 lines that go like that. And if you want low immigration, it means a hell of a lot of more borrowing. It basically means a lot less money to go into public services. And the reason I think that doesn't make it into the public debate is because it's a counterintuitive concept.
Yes.
And they're always really hard to sell. I mean,
Because it's per capita, and if there are more caps,
but
then
the
there's less
amount
to
of
each
times
person.
I've tried to explain to people that things like GP appointments, they're elastic. They're not an inelastic thing that is there in a certain number. And if you get rid of X amount of people, there'll be more GP appointments. If you get rid of the people who pay for the GP appointments, there will be fewer for you, not more.
And you will also be getting rid of a chunk of those GPs.
I know. It's such a hard one to explain to people because I think so much of this is about space. I mean, it's really weird. Like the most horrid things I've had said to me have always been about contested space. And I mean contested physical space. The 15-year-old on a bicycle that cycles by on the pavement and I go, oi, watch it.
Yeah.
And they turn around and go, you shouldn't even fucking be here. Or the guy that was reversing out of his parking space a couple of months ago and almost bumped into me. And then I think because he got scared, he started shouting, fuck off back to your own country. But it's always space. It is always specifically when people feel that there's been a contest over physical space, their first go-to, if you look like you're not from here, is that.
I think that really plays out throughout this nihilism that we have in our politics, consistently just saying that we need to stop right here. This is how many houses we can have. This is how much infrastructure we can have.
We're an island.
We are an island.
We're full.
We're done. We're stopped. And you combine that with an aging population. And what you're actually saying is that you would rather for the UK population to age out and die off completely, and the last one of us just switch off the lights as we go, than to build the houses to support the population that we need. And when I talk about this, and people say, oh, but immigrants grow old too. And I'm like, yeah, they're human. You spotted it. Finally, they've got there. And and they say, so then we'll need more people after that. I'm like, yes, forever. If we want to have a country called the UK, you know who it is? There has to be people in it. If there's no people here, then there isn't actually a country. And this is this incredible,
even though actually a lot of immigrants do go back.
Of course they do. And other people just die.
They're more likely to have a baby.
No, but also immigration is such a sweet fucking deal. We come already educated.
Yeah, I mean the most expensive thing you can do in your life is be born. Is be born. And that's already done by definition by the immigrants.
Like, born, we've gone to school, we've got qualification skills, we come here, we work, and a lot of us then piss off.
The one time in recent years that the trend has bucked or been bucked in that regard is, of course, when Putin invades Ukraine and countries across Europe had quite a collective approach to saying, OK, Ukrainian refugees, you may come. And there was a system and you could apply and it was a safe and legal route. Zoe, I'd love to know, because you analyse this the world over, what can governments learn from that more collective approach? And like, why
did it work so much better?
Why did it work so much better? And we won't necessarily talk about the fact that it is a white Christian country in this regard, but just why, when governments work together and sort of come up with a plan for it, and what are the distorting impacts on the movement of people when borders do close near to conflict?
Yeah, well, so obviously there is the fact that Ukraine was quite quickly presented as a white Christian country of people like us, having previously been, I'm sorry, but an Eastern European country of people not quite like us.
Yep.
I mean, you think about the Brexit debate and how we talked about Eastern Europeans then, Ukraine wasn't presented as people like us until quite recently. So I think it teaches us how very, very malleable the concept of who is the other is. And that can go in both directions. Yeah. So anybody like Suella Braverman should really watch yourself. The leopards will one day eat your face. Ukraine is a country of 38 million people, and we had an uncapped safe route for them to come and find safety here when their country was invaded by a bloodthirsty dictator. 200,000 people came. Now, listen, 200,000 people is quite a lot of people, right? It's how many times? 5, 6 times as many people as come over in a boat in a year. And yet we managed it just fine. And out of 38 million people, that's how many people came. But I think it's really, really important to emphasize that, because even people who do care about refugees and who do want to do the right thing worry that there is too much need. And I think a lot of the conversation we've been having about how we need people goes a long way to sort of coming back against that. But the other side of it is that most people don't want to travel very far.
Right. So we only took 200,000. Poland, presumably, and other neighbouring countries absorbed
far more. Yeah, and that's always what happens. The first thing you do, and in any situation of displacement, the vast majority of people who are displaced worldwide are displaced within the borders of their own country. Vast majority. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then the next group are in the neighbouring country. And then the next group are in the region of that country. And only a very, very small proportion of people over time tend to migrate long distances for longer periods of time. Most people want to be able to travel back and forth in a circular pattern. As you were saying, often people go back, especially people from, countries where, frankly, the weather and food is a lot better. they want to go retiring back.
What are you still doing here? Why?
Not Alessandro Georgiou. He's British.
He's British. Well, he's made his bed, and I'm very sorry for him.
Absolute tit.
What an idiot. Yeah, but I mean, and it is one of the distorting elements of our post-Brexit immigration system, which is that people just don't have the flexibility to go where there is the best opportunities for work, the best opportunities for education, and then to move back again or somewhere else again. And that is, what has made freedom of movement such an incredibly positive thing, not just socially, but economically, because people can move flexibly and they self-govern where they go. And they, guess what? Don't go to somewhere where they'd have to scrape by on benefits. They don't. Nobody chooses that. Literally nobody who has a choice chooses that kind of life. The perverse impact of some of the restrictions on immigration that we see is that people have to make a longer journey and a more permanent decision to move. Yeah. And then again, if their visa runs out and they are unable to renew their visa because of the cost of it or so on, then they might end up just deciding that their only option is to overstay. Whereas if that happened to you and you were a beneficiary of free movement, well, you would leave because it wouldn't matter. You would have the option of coming back in the future.
It's the perfect expression of the free market.
Indeed.
People go where there is basically demand for their skills. And to think that suddenly free market conservatives the world over have become completely ideologically opposed to that, it's just really weird. From a free market economic point of view, it's really weird.
There is
to say we'll shrink the economy.
But that's it. Because the only way to really guarantee to reduce immigration to the UK, because as we saw, Brexit didn't do that, would be to crash our economy. Argentina has had for several years now one of the, scholars say, the most permissive immigration system in the entire world, bar none. Right? It's a borderline an open border situation. But nobody bloody goes there. I mean, not even people huge, massive refugee populations from neighboring countries like Venezuela. They're still not going to Argentina. Why? Well, because it's an economic basket case. There isn't jobs, there isn't work. That is how you want it. You want to reduce immigration very, very significantly, crash the economy, create a situation where there are no jobs. Then people don't come. Yeah. The primary reason why people go to a place is because it's where they can support themselves and build a life.
Zoe, there is so much people can and should be doing, but if you could pick one call to action for our listeners who care about pro-immigration as we do, what would you ask them?
There's a wonderful group called Rise, and they are a group of people who have lived experience of being undocumented in the UK. And in response to this chat we've been having about deportations and the horrific agenda on the right to demonize people who are living here undocumented, one of the problems that they experience is that we basically have no pathways to regularization. They have a petition on the government website just launched where they are asking for shorter and better and more affordable routes to regularization for the undocumented migrant population. I really think it would be amazing if we forced parliamentarians to have a debate about that issue. And this is what we're saying about there isn't this platform for conversations about the alternatives. This would create one, and it's really, really needed. So
thank you. We will leave a link in the show notes, and we will encourage everybody to go and sign up.
Quiet Riot.
Now, there was so much to talk about that we're not going to get round to doing Grin and Share It today. Do forgive us. On Sunday, Naomi will be hosting Sunday School with Kenny. Woo! He's getting his Sunday School debut because it's my birthday, and so I'm having the weekend off. Yay! And so you can look forward to a Grin and Share It there.
And as the sun sets on the sunlit uplands that never appeared, it's the end of our show. And our enormous thanks to Zoe Gardner for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Plus a huge thank you to everyone who tuned in today. Remember to head over to ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod and sign up as a monthly backer if you can.
And as Alex said, I'll be back on Sunday. So it's farewell for now, but not before we wish Alex a very happy birthday.
Thank you, Naomi.
Happy
and goodbye
birthday.
for now. Don't forget how much we love you. See you.
Bye.
Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith and Alex Andreou. Produced by Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangeeta. Artwork by Simona Canelu. And edited by me, Alex Reese. Quiet Riot is a co-production with Soundstone Global.
Quiet Riot.
Boom.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Oh, I'm sorry. I always talk too much.
No, it's great.
Literally, I just can't shut up. You know, you were going to ask, like, how can I repeat the same thing? I don't know why. I just, like, I can never run out of saying.